This video is brought to you by Glasshammer Gaming. Use the code CommandPhase to get an extra 5% off your models and hobby supplies. A link to their store is in the video description below. Hello and welcome to the Command Phase. My name is Mark and thank you so much for joining me. So you've picked up your first box of miniatures and looking to understand how to build them. Well, in this video we're going to go through everything you need to know, from what tools you'll need through the entire process of clipping out your parts, cleaning them up and putting them all together to make a completed miniature, including tips to make sure you have the best possible model you can for the painting stage. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. There are 4 main tools you'll need to build your models. First up is a set of flat edge clippers to remove the pieces from the sprue. They come in a variety of prices, but I would highly recommend getting a good set like this Tamiya Slim Jaw 2 pair, as they cut through the sprues like butter, as opposed to a cheaper set I have here which puts a lot more strain on the sprue. It's certainly not essential that you do spend more here, just a recommendation as they'll last a long time. Next up is a hobby knife to remove any extra little bits and cleaning up mould lines. You're typically looking for one with a number 11 blade, and this certainly doesn't need to be a high costing item. An X-Acto blade more than does the job here. To go with the knife is also a self-healing cutting mat, and this is just to protect the surface that you're working on. Last of all is some glue to stick the models together. As the majority of models Games Workshop makes are made from polystyrene, you'll find a plastic glue or cement will provide a much stronger bond than super glue. Plastic glue melts the surface of the plastic and bonds them together, whereas super glue can be pulled apart with a little amount of force, which certainly can be useful. Superglue is needed if the models are made from a resin or even metal, plus it can be useful for a temporary solution and sub assemblies, which we'll go over later on in the video. There are some extra tools you could utilise for the building process which are nice to have. First of which is some Tamiya sanding sponge. I like to use about a 2000 fine grit just to help smooth the surfaces that we've cleaned up with the hobby knife without removing much, if any, of the detail. The other is some gap filling putty, as not every model goes together absolutely perfectly. This just allows us to fill in any gaps and create a smooth surface to paint on. There are plenty of options here to do this job, from green stuff, liquid green stuff, milli putty, but the one I'm a fan of is this Vallejo plastic putty, which can be directly applied to the area and then spread out. And once dry, it's easy to clean up any of the excess afterwards. It's great value for money too, but I would recommend to go for whichever one that you would prefer to use. So when you open your box, you'll see all of your models in pieces attached to a sprue, alongside a set of instructions and a set of bases. This may well look a little daunting at first, but by the end of this video, you'll have no problems getting all of your models together. As much fun as it might be to ditch the instructions and dive straight in, I would 100% make sure you take the time to look through the instructions, as each of the pieces are typically designed to go together in a specific way and order depending on the character or weapon loadout. As you can see from this Cities of Sigmar Free Guild Command Corps box, on the back there are different variations that you'll be able to build from the bits inside. Plus, in the instructions, it'll also let you know which numbered pieces you need to use to build the model, alongside which set of instructions you need to follow to build the variation you want to. If you purchased some models from the secondary market and it didn't come with any of the instructions, you can email Games Workshop directly via this email on the screen now, and they'll hopefully get back to you fairly quickly with a PDF of the instructions. Or there is a great subreddit of Warhammer instructions, which I'll pop a link in the description below for you, that'll more than likely have the instructions you're looking for if you don't want to have to wait. Once you've decided which model you'd like to build, you then need to look through the sprues to find the relevant numbered parts, and we'll start to clip these out. You have 2 options here. Either start to clip each piece tidy and build as you go, or if you know the variation of the model you'd like, then feel free to clip them all out at once before tidying. Neither way is incorrect, but if you do go for the latter version, try to keep things organised. When clipping your miniatures out, you'll find them being held by one or more connections to the sprue itself. Here we want to utilise our clippers to cut these connections to remove the bits. please leave a gap between the clippers and the bit you're trying to cut from the sprue rather than putting them flush to the piece. This is mainly so you don't cause any damage to the bit itself that the clipper can cause when cutting. These little bits of excess are easy enough to clean up afterwards, and it's far better to have to do that than have a damaged part. Continue to do this for all the other pieces you need, and then we'll go to the next step. There are two main things you're looking to clean up on the model at this stage: the excess bits from the connections from snipping out the bits from the sprues, and the mould lines on the model created by the injection mould process. First up are the excess bits, and these are pretty straightforward to clean up. You'll need to take your hobby knife, preferably with a fresh blade, as this will make it easier and safer to remove it, as it will take less force to cut through, and slowly cut away the excess, moving the blade away from you so you don't accidentally cut yourself. Don't use too much pressure to cut these off so you don't accidentally gouge any of the model. You can take as much time as you need to remove these excess pieces in small bits if needed. Then once done, run your blade across the surface with very little pressure to smooth it out. The next thing to clean up is the mould lines, and depending on the age of the model, you'll find these mould lines can be fairly subtle to pretty obvious. The main issue with these is if you haven't removed them before painting your model, they will become a lot more obvious with any dry brushing, contrast paints or inks, making an unwanted blemish on your model. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to remove these and will make a huge difference to the end result. To remove them, I like to use the reverse side of a hobby knife, utilising the blunt edge to run across these with very little pressure to slowly scrape them away until the surface is smooth. You can of course use the point of the blade to get into some harder and reach places as needed, but be careful not to gouge out more than you want to. You may see that the colour of the plastic where you've tidied up the excess is a slightly different colour, but don't worry about this as it'll still be smooth at the end of this process and won't affect the paint. There is a mould line remover that Games Workshop makes which some hobbyists swear by, but I'm personally not the biggest fan, and the hobby knife can do just as good a job, but feel free to try it out if you want to. If you did have any of the sanding sponge, use that over the top of the areas that you've cleaned up just to smooth the surfaces even more for painting without removing any of the details. Repeat this process for each of the model pieces and then you'll be ready for the next step. The next stage is starting to assemble your models, but before you do start to glue the bits together, I'd advise placing the pieces next to one another so you can see how they are supposed to go together before using any glue, following the instructions as you do so. This helps to avoid any mistakes in the process causing unnecessary damage to the model. Take your time here, and once you're happy with how the pieces go together, it's time to start gluing. This step is as simple as it sounds. Utilising whichever glue you need for the type of model you have, place a small amount along the connection part needed, and when happy, push the pieces together and hold it for about 10 to 20 seconds to secure the bond. Repeat this process for all of the pieces of the model, double checking where needed with dry fitting and the instructions. Remember to take your time here to avoid any mistakes. You may find some of Games Workshop models are push fit. These technically can be built without the need to glue any of the pieces together, although I've often found these require a lot of effort to do so. Personally, I trim the connections slightly to make sure the pieces fit together easily and glue not only the connections but also the edges of the model where these fit together, just like a regular model. You don't need to do this if you don't want to, but I just tend to find this way works better for me. There may be times in the building process where a piece may well restrict painting certain parts of the model, such as the shield here on the steel helm, or potentially wanting to have the head separate to access it easier with a brush or priming the model with a different colour. This is where sub assemblies come in. This method keeps the parts separate for the painting phase, including the bases, and then gluing these together afterwards using super glue so it doesn't end up causing issues with the paint to finish the assembly. For this, I like to use some corks to attach the pieces to and hold during painting, a pin vise or hand drill to create a hole where it won't be visible to pin the model, paper clips to use for the pinning process, and super glue to attach the paper clip to the model and cork. To do this, simply decide how many pieces you want for a sub-assembly. Drill a hole in the model where it won't be visible at the end of the process to attach part of a paperclip to, using a drill bit that's the same size as the paperclip to drill a hole. I tend to find picking a spot which is one of the connection points is often a good place for this. Then unfold the paperclip and cut a length of this. Typically a third of one is a good size. Using superglue, put a drop on the end of the paperclip and slot this into the hole that you've just drilled. Then create a hole in the cork with the drill, and afterwards using superglue, put a drop on that location and slot the other end of the paperclip in there. Repeat this process for as many pieces as you want to have separate. The last thing left to do here to have your model ready to be primed and painted is to fill in any gaps. These can appear in the building process where two pieces connect that might not be flush. These gaps may well become a little unsightly once the model has been painted, but you'll be glad to know this is a pretty straightforward process, so nothing to worry about. For this, take your gap filling material of choice, so for me it's the plastic putty from Vallejo. Put this in the location of the gap and smooth over as needed with a brush. Then you'll need to wait for this to dry, which can take a couple of hours. Once dry, you can utilise your hobby knife and sandpaper to smooth out the area, and the gap will be filled and ready for painting. So if you followed the process, you should have some assembled models of your own ready to base, prime and paint to get them ready to play on the tabletop. If you have any questions about the process, pop them down in the comments section below and I'll be more than happy to answer any of them for you. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, please do hit and like the subscribe button as it really helps the channel to grow. Thank you all so much for watching the command phase, and I'll see you in the next video.